Welcome to the new edition of the NSCF Online Engagement Series, a discussion forum. We do hope that everyone is still healthy and safe wherever they are joining us from. We know that some people are still working from home while others have been able to go back to their institutions. This edition is the first of its kind. It is a discussion forum, as I have mentioned. Its purpose is to get an opportunity to discuss, share, and reflect on previously aired webinars. A reminder to those that might not remember, the last aired webinar was on the manual implementation. So then this becomes the discussion forum for the manual implementation. Another webinar we will have in the future will be the ethics webinar. So that will be followed by an ethics discussion forum and so forth. So the discussion forums will always follow after webinars. The purpose is to learn from one another and discuss anything from what the previously aired webinar asked of us in terms of manual implementation to manual statements or requirements that people might feel are not clear in the manual. The institutions that have started the manual implementation activities will share what processes they have followed to get started, share where they had challenges, where they had fun, and I certainly hope we are going to remember to have some fun, and share what happened that they least expected, as well as share whatever it is that they might be struggling with. So the discussion forums are basically a platform to discuss any manual implementation related issues and whatever else that the NSCF community deems necessary. Today we are joined by Precious Chililo, an entomology research assistant in the National Museum of Bloemfontein. She is also a working group representative for the National Museum. She joined the museum in August 2019 and shortly became a working group representative. I think it is worth mentioning that the National Museum was the last institution to officially join the network, but that hasn't stopped them from kickstarting the manual implementation process. And so Precious will take us through what they've been able to achieve so far. Also joining us today is Sifelani Jira. He is a collection manager at the Evolutionary Studies Institute, which is based in the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Sifelani will also share about some of the stuff that AC has been able to achieve and give us a plan of how they intend to tackle the rest of the stuff. Lastly, we will be joined by Dr. Christina Potgieter. She is a principal technician at the Buse Herbarium, which is located in the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg. She will also be talking to us about the challenges that the Buse Herbarium has in terms of implementing the manual. Next slide, please. So a reminder of the guidelines for engagement. Please keep your contributions helpful and considerate of the host and other participants. Do use the chat box to say hello and let us know which institutions you are from. Use the Q&A box to add questions regarding the panelist presentation. The panelists will be answering some of your questions live at the end of the discussion forum. However, due to time constraints, we might not be able to answer all the questions live, and the answers will be then provided to the discussion forum link afterwards. Next slide, please. So the discussion forum outline is as follows. I will be giving you guys a brief background on the collection management and conservation manual, then talk about why we should implement the manual. Precious will then take us through what the NMB has been able to achieve so far in terms of manual implementation. And this will include equipment bought and the processes and the progress, the challenges, and what their next step will be as the National Museum in terms of continuing with the manual implementation. Then Sifelani will take us through the SE process and share on what progress they have made and what still needs to be done, and then talk about some sample documents that SE has in place which are already in line with the manual recommendation. Then Christina will talk about the process and the challenges at the Buse Herbarium. And then at that point, we will answer the questions that you guys may have put in the Q&A box for the panel, and then also go to a discussion where everyone gets an opportunity to then share the progress from their institution or start a discussion based on what has come out from the presentation given by the panelists. If you can go to the next slide for me, please. So the background on the collection management manual is that one of the NSCF's objective was to secure and make collections accessible both physically and virtually for research, and make sure that that's also in a healthy and safe environment. And so to do this, we needed to have a better understanding of collection management and almost have a guide to go to, which is why the manual was then developed. And the manual will be used as a guide with the recommendations of how to best look after the collections that we have. If you can go to the next slide for me, please. So why should we implement the collection management manual? We should do this to ensure consistency across the collections, the staff, and the institutions, as we will all be adhering to the common policies, standards, and procedures as laid out in the manual. An example that comes to mind is a guide to a fair, transparent decision-making about accessing the collections or the data. So in chapter 6, where we are addressing access to collection, there is a guide that is laid out there on what institutions should have in place to ensure that we indeed have a transparent and a fair decision-making process when it comes to access. And so we'll all be following the same guide. It is also important because it ensures that managing the collections in a professional, scientific, and effective way will be something that we can all achieve. As I mentioned, we will be adhering to the same document, the same standards, the same guidelines as stipulated in the manual that we have collectively developed. It also sets the standard that we need to work on towards becoming a more professional and scientific community, because we are all looking after a very irreplaceable research infrastructure, which is our collections. The DSI sees the collection as a research infrastructure themselves. And so our collections are also a decision-making resource, so we need to have a set of standards that we adhere to so that we make sure we are able to look after the collections the best way we can. It is also a tool in our journey together as the NSCF that is very necessary, because it will transform us as institutions from individually working and from being isolated to a credible and strong community. We have already seen the benefit of working together to achieve great things. The manual development is an example of what was possible to achieve when we were working together. And so we shouldn't stop there. There's just plenty more to achieve. Even if the NSCF no longer exists, we should be able to work together as institutions to continue the betterment of the collections that we look after, as well as, I suppose, of everything. Implementing the manual will also help the staff and managers know what action is required and how to exactly carry out that required action. So an example that comes to mind is a simple thing, topping up alcohol. So if you are topping up your wet collection, it might look like you just need to fill up whatever volume will have evaporated, but you actually need to follow certain steps. Like you first need to find out the concentration of the preservative that is remaining in the jar that you are about to top up, and then get the difference between the preservative concentration and that of the concentration in the jar. So instead of just adding 70% to fill up that jar, you should note, you should actually add the difference between the two concentrations, because adding 70% or even a higher concentration will actually restart the process, the reaction process between the specimen and the preservative in use. So to have something that you would go to as a guide that will be as useful as the manual is something very useful, because you know exactly how to then carry out that activity as opposed to carrying it out how you think it should be carried out. Implementing the manual will also offer guidelines for the health and safety of everyone who works in the collection. I can safely say that during the manual development, it became very evident that we did not know as much as we should when it came to health and safety, both for the specimens in the collection and for the human life guarding or looking after the collections. It will also be the basis for training so that we can professionalize the collection management. So as we implement the manual, we will be able to identify gaps in the collection management and then be in a better position to provide collection management training needs. At this point, I will then hand over to Precious, who will take us through the process that the NMB has followed or has started with in terms of the manual implementation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Just indicate if you can hear me, please. You can. Okay, cool. Thanks, Audrey. So I'm Precious Chirito from the National Museum in Bloemfontein. So I will first take you through my first National Working Group meeting that I attended and the national meeting that was attended here in Bloemfontein. So my first meeting was held, that I attended for the National Working Group was held in Pretoria. That was in 2019 November. And then soon after that, the National Museum hosted the National Working Group meeting in Feb 2020. So they, most collection-based staff attended the working group meeting for the very first time. They got an opportunity to also contribute in the structuring of the manual and also interact with staff from other museums and discussed challenges that other museums were facing in various collections. So shortly after the meeting that was held in Bloemfontein, Yuri, who was the longest serving member that represented the National Museum in the working group, left. That's when I was asked to represent the National Museum in the working group. And to me, that was an opportunity to learn more about different collections, even though I was more interested and more fascinated in the entomology collection that I worked with. So I learned more about what other museums were doing, what challenges they were facing, and how they were able to resolve them. So that also made it easier for me to settle into my role, since that was not long after my appointment. Next, please. So in terms of manual implementation, NNB was able to purchase the following equipment based on manual recommendations for the collection care chapter. So we, and all thanks to the NSCF, we purchased console jars. We are, however, still waiting for lids, and this is for the wet collection. We bought an alcohol density meter, a microscope and a camera for the visitors, a data logger for the entomology collection to record temperature and humidity, sticky traps for all collection, and steel cabinet for the mammalogy department. Next, please. Next, please. We also purchased an accession register that was designed and we had it binded. So the accession register at per CITES recommendation. We also purchased a dehumidifier for the entomology department. Next, please. So this is how we started tackling manual implementation. Dr. Liesel, who is a coordinating committee representative for the National Museum, she convened monthly meetings that are attended by all HODs and collection staff. So as a result of that meeting, the management decided to then include manual implementation as a standard item in all HOD meetings. And they also included manual implementation as part of KPAs in all HODs and collection management staff. So what happens in our meetings is we look at one chapter per meeting. In that chapter, we go through it, we look at documentations required and also look at what are the missing documentations that we don't have based on that chapter. So after that, HODs and relevant staff are then tasked with drafting documents, for example, SOPs or policies that we might not have in place for that specific chapter. So the HODs will then follow proper channels to have the documents approved. To date, we've held 2 meetings looking at chapter 1 and 2. And for chapter 2, we saw that all policies were already in place, and that's embedded in one document that was reviewed last year. And the SOPs that we did not have and the HODs are still in process of drafting those documentations. And the CEO will then sign off on that. Policies will then be approved by the council. So that was for chapter 1. Chapter 2, the deaccessioning policy we did not have and have since been drafted and will soon be approved by council. Next, please. Okay, so feedback from the 2 meetings that we held. It's more of the issues that came out from those meetings concerning the forms in chapter 1. The first one is the donation form. There were more concerns with regard to the form because there are departments that receive a lot of donations from the general public, and some of the donors might not necessarily or be willing to sign those donation form, and that might discourage them from making any future donations. Another form was the basic collection object form. I think this one might have been addressed in the working group meeting that I've missed, but then here we are just confused in terms of, is it just one form per sample, or is it one form that you need to fill per trip that you go to? Another form that we are confused or having concern about is the object movement slip. Here, the concern is that this will add a lot of papers. So can you imagine every time you need to move a specimen from the collection to your office or vice versa, you need to then print out a form. So it was then suggested that we can have a register book. And then instead of having to print out forms, then you just fill out the register book in the collections. So challenges with regard to the implementation. Here, others feel like the manual development process was not very inclusive, but then this might be because the National Museum signed the MOU later on when other museums were already on board. So they feel like they would have liked to input on the document. Also, the checklist, some feel like it's overwhelming. They don't really know where to start. So I'm more interested in hearing what other museums or institutions are tackling that. So what's next? We will be tackling the chapter 9 collections ethics in the next meeting, and also the digitization policy. They are busy drafting that. Yeah, I look forward to hearing how far other museums are in terms of manual implementation and the challenges they're facing, so that we can also anticipate them, and also to the institutions that might not have started with the implementation. Yeah, so I hope that they have, or they can get an idea of where to start and how to start based on the discussion that we are having today. Thank you for listening to me. I will now hand over to Svelani Jara from the Evolutionary Studies Institute at Wits University. Over to you, Svelani. Thank you.
All right, so at the ESI, we have been working under these COVID times. So this slide serves to show you that we are a bit compliant in terms of COVID mitigations. On the slide there, you have the hand sanitizer, and also we have a box for the disposal of any material that might be COVID contaminated, e.g. any toilet paper or tissue paper that you may use. You don't dispose it in a normal rubbish bin, but instead in that special kind of bin, so that we don't expose those who collect the dustbins. We don't expose them to COVID. Right, so now in terms of the implementation of the manual, so once we had completed the manual development process, the curator and I sat down, discussed that manual, and then we set up a meeting with the director of the institute, Professor Marion Bamford, and then we discussed the manual, and then tried to suss out now where we stand in terms of compliance. That is at policy level, as well as the standard operating procedures. So now, as the curatorial staff, we identify the policies, the standards, procedures that are present at the SI, as well as try and pick up those that are still missing. So after we had satisfied ourselves that we at least are in compliance with what the NSCF expects of us, we then got on to implementation stage of the manual. Next slide, please. All right, in terms of the progress. All right, chapters 1 and 2. So chapter 1 speaks to the acquisition of collection objects, and chapter 2 is the deaccessioning of the collection objects. So our chapter 1, at policy level, the manual and the ESI policy on acquisition is at par, though at SOP level, we as the ESI are yet to provide a handwritten accession register and workflow. So this is still a to-do in our to-do list. So our register for incoming fossils from staff collecting trips and which features the name of the receiver, date, accompanying docs, etc. It's what we should come up with together with that handwritten accession register. So because currently the ESI, we enter the data directly onto some accession sheets whose information is directly transcribed onto the electronic database. And then we keep those sheets, accession sheets, safely in a cupboard somewhere. But now I think we have to adopt the method suggested in the manual, where we have to come up with a handwritten accession register. Now, as for chapter 2, the deaccessioning of collection objects, we at the SI are compliant both in terms of the policy and the SOP. Now, chapter 3 speaks to the documentation of collection activities. Now, what we still need to do at the ESI is to compile that, to come up with that register that will feature the information from the collecting trips, record everything regarding the specimens that we receive in our collections, not just to enter the data in those collection sheets that we currently have. And then chapter 3 also covers the disaster report. So in terms of disaster report, at the ESI, we once had a case of specimen theft about 8 years ago. And that specimen, we made sure that we report to the university and also to the SAPS, so that we can tick that we do really have some records of whatever happens in our collections. Now, still to do in terms of chapter 3 would be to come up with a plan to have a backup of our database offsite. Because at the moment we just back up our database in our external hard drives, but since we are about to migrate to specify, we are now looking into coming up with a backup plan, be it at the university servers for our database. And then chapter 4 speaks to the data quality standards and accessions. So at the moment, we are currently cleaning our data, our access data, in preparation for migration to specify, so that in the end, our data satisfies the 4 C's. That is, data that is complete, correct, comprehensive, and consistent. And then chapter 5 is collections care. And at the ESI, we have some measures to try and take care of our fossil collections. For example, we have a fire-resistant door to the entrance to our main collections, so that in the event of a fire, one is able to get out without burning at the door, because some of these doors will catch fire and you won't be able to go through. And also, in addition to that, we have an air conditioner in the collections, temperature and humidity controls that are operational. We also use what we call archival materials when we do our curation and conservation processes in the collections. So archival stuff, in terms of the boxes that you use, the pens that you use, whatever paints that you may use on your fossils. So all has to be of good standards in terms of international best practice. You don't just use any glue on a fossil. You don't just use any pen on a fossil. You must use archival stuff. So then chapter 6 speaks to the access to collections and associated data. This one, we at the ESI are compliant both at policy level as well as the standard operating procedures. So at the ESI, we have what is called free access policy in terms of accessing all the fossil material that is curated in our repository. And then now, how do people apply for access to the collections? We have the application forms, be it for hominid material or non-hominid material. So what happens is the scientist applies for access, and then us as the curatorial team, we are not involved in the adjudication of your application. We just send the application to the fossil advisory panel, and this advisory panel is the one that adjudicates. It's made up of all the researchers that are based in our institute. So they are the ones that go through the proposal and the methodologies to be used, and then come up with a decision in 10 working days whether they grant access or they deny access. And in the event of access being denied, there is also a panel that deals with those appeals. So we call it the appeal panel. So they need to look at why your access was denied, and then they make a decision. So this, I think, is a good way of going around it, because you don't want to give too much power to the curatorial team to be the ones determining who has access and who doesn't have access, because we may end up turning these collections guys into some mini gods who may end up standing in the way of research. And then now, in terms of digital data, also we have the application process where if you want to access our digital data, you send in an application, your proposal, and then again, it goes through that fossil advisory panel, and then they either grant or deny access. And once they grant access, we send you the IP, intellectual property agreement forms. You sign the intellectual agreement form, where you commit yourself to only using the data for the intended project. In the event of you now trying to increase or extend the scope of your research, then it goes without saying that you have to then put another motivation as to what you want to do with the data, because we are avoiding a situation whereby you just take the data and then using a proposal, but now we see a plethora of research papers coming out of that data without you having mentioned them in your proposal. Right, so then now chapter 7 talks about risk and disaster management. Here, the ESI risk and disaster management policy is in line with the manual chapter 7. Now, our emergency response is the one that still needs a bit of fine-tuning, especially the training of additional staff, so that in the event of any disaster, we have more hands that can help to try and salvage the collections in the event of such kind of disasters. And then chapter 8 is health and safety in the collections. And for this, next slide, please. And for this, we have in the collection area a lot of fire extinguishers, first aid kits or first aid boxes, the water hose to extinguish any fires that may break in the collections. So we can say, in terms of health and safety, we are a bit compliant, though we can still improve on what we currently have. But if I may also add, our firefighting equipment, we also always make sure that it's always up to date. So our fire extinguishers, we always have them checked, and they also check that that hose has water in it all the times. And then chapter 9 speaks about collection ethics. So I can say at the ESI, in terms of policy, we are compliant with chapter 9 of the manual. And then finally, we have permitting requirements. So with permitting requirements, when you want to destructively sample a specimen, or you want to take the specimen out of the country, we send your proposal to the advisory panel, which grants that proposal, or they can say they can okay it, or they can deny it. Once it's okayed, the curatorial team then applies for a permit from SARA to issue that destructive sampling permit, or to issue the export permit to the researcher. Next slide, please. So this, again, is just a repeat of what I have said earlier in terms of accessing ESI collections. What the visitors to the collections are expected to do in terms of applications. Once the application is granted, then we send you the rules, the do's and the don'ts once you're in our collections, and also make sure that the visitors sign the guest book when they arrive at the institute. Then next slide, please. Right, so this is a sample of our documents, the data management policy, our fossil access policies and rules, and then also a sample of how our Microsoft Access catalog looks like. But at the moment, we are currently cleaning that data because in the next 2 weeks, we are going to be sending our data to the guy who is going to migrate us to specify. So basically, this is all about the progress of the ESI in terms of implementing the collections conservation manual. So now I look forward to also hearing from other institutions on how they've been tackling this manual, how far they are in terms of implementation, so that we can also anticipate whatever challenges that may come as a result, and also be on standby to assist those who may feel that the ESI has something to offer. We will always be happy to assist. So with that said, I now hand you over to Dr. Christine Potgieter from the BU's Herbarium in Pietermaritzburg, UKZN campus. I thank you.
Thanks, Sefalani. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that haven't had an introduction to our collection before, we are based in Pietermaritzburg on the Pietermaritzburg campus of UKZN, and we're situated in the School of Life Sciences. We are mostly a research and teaching plant collection with over 150,000 specimens, and our numbers are increasing daily as we incorporate orphan collections. We only have 2 full-time staff members, myself and Ms. Magwaza, and then our curator, Dr. Bitterbeer, dedicates 20% of his time to collections. The rest of his time is spent on teaching and research. So as a result, even though we've been very fortunate with contract staff and interns currently and in the past, these contracts have very specific outcomes and timelines. So we cannot really rely on these extra people to assist us with the implementation of the manual, which means that the manual implementation falls mostly on the shoulders of the 2 of us, myself and Ms. Magwaza, with me having to take the lead. And I mention this because we don't operate like some museums where you have many different departments that have curators that then have to sit and agree on things. before decisions are made. We are a much smaller staff, which makes it easier for us, but also that comes at the expense of time. It means that fewer people spend more time on these processes. So what I've focused my short presentation on is more on the challenges that we've had or that I foresee. I have to say that we've been very fortunate with support from the NSCF. So many of the things that Precious, for example, mentioned, equipment and supplies that the NSCF supplied to them, they've also supplied to us. We've been assisted with blinds, blockout blinds, for example, where we used to have rather useless curtains, which helps to keep UV and light off our specimens while they're being used on our extensive working benches. We were very fortunate to get extra metal cupboards, similar to what we've had before, to fill up some space gaps, which has assisted us to accommodate our orphan collections better. And then quite a few small things. We are using sticky traps for the first time. So I then ordered, I see there was a discussion earlier about sticky traps in the chat box, which is why I'm mentioning it. I tried to order a range of sticky traps from Insect Science to see which works best for us. Because for a herbarium, you really do need some monitoring within the cupboards as well, because sometimes most of the times we suspect any attacks of, say, beetles actually come from within specimens that have gone into cupboards. So just putting a sticky trap in the corner of the room might not be good enough for us. We're not really worried about the odd cockroach because we just don't get them. For us, we need to know what's going on in the cupboards, and that's more of a challenge. So I'm trying out a variety of things. And once I've got some idea of what works better and what not, we'll share this with other herbaria. So I think when it comes to manual implementation, we're going to find that different types of collections are going to have more or less problems. So I think the idea of having groups that are organized by collection will really help a lot with this, so that all herbarium people can ask questions to other herbarium folk. All wet collections people can share with wet collections people. I do think that that is the way to go for assisting with advice on the implementation. Next slide, please. So I foresee two major challenges for our implementation. The first one is documentation, the sheer volume of it, and I think we're all a bit overwhelmed. Policies, written standard operating procedures, forms, registers. So in our case, some of it does exist and it's been actively used. For example, we had an accession register, a handwritten one in the past, and there are some years, unfortunately, with a gap. And then when I started in about 20 odd years ago, we resumed that, and subsequently we went to an electronic system. So what we've done is we've actually printed out our database since then, since the last records that we found handwritten, and we've bound those. And we know that there's still a gap, but hopefully once our digitization efforts have been completed, we can fill those gaps. We've always kept a visitor's book, and it's very interesting to see how many visitors we actually do get. Our loan documentation is pretty standard for other herbaria as well. What I think we're lacking is that some things exist in daily practice, but does not get formalized and documented and filed. For example, decision-making around loans. We tend to receive an email from someone, forward it to the curator, we discuss it, and then we email them back. We say, these are our conditions, and then we send the loans, and all the conditions are set out formally in the loan forms, and they sign a copy and send it back to us. But I have never found a herbarium that has asked us to fill out a standard loan request form beforehand, for example. So I think we're all going to have to implement that. That's something that I don't think anyone has in place. Perhaps the museums, like I hear from Sifalani's talk, that you have quite a good system, but most herbaria don't. The Herbarium in Paris has an online system where you do your applications, but those of us that have dealt with it might agree with me that that actually doesn't always work very well. You often have to follow up a lot to get them to follow up as well. And then some documentation just has never existed. For example, this having to formally ask for a loan on a specific form, for example. So we're all going to have to implement that from scratch. I've been thinking about whether there's perhaps a way to do that electronically so that one has forms that people can fill in online, perhaps rather than paper backwards and forwards, or paper printed, scanned, emailed backwards, then printed out when you come back. I know that we do need to keep records of everything in hard copy as well, but I think it might be interesting for people to discuss if there are perhaps ways to perhaps combine documents, so for example, related to a loan, so that you can keep one big online document and print it out at the end or something. I don't know. I think we must chat about that. So while the documentation side of things is going to be time consuming to set up, we can achieve this in-house with minimal input from other university bodies. Certainly within our school, we can solve many of the challenges that we will have with that. So I'm not too worried about that. The thing I am a bit worried about is the disaster management and health and safety documentation. So our actual health and safety and disaster plans are in place and they're functioning in practice. So don't worry, our collections are safe. I think for most of us, our collections are actually as safe as they can be. But of course, there's always aspects that need attention or upgrading or tweaking. And I think here the manual is really useful. And I also think something we must remember is that the manual is a living document. So for example, after the fires on the UCT campus, it's important to also add into the manual that another reason why you shouldn't have trees near the building is because they can catch fire, which is what happened near the Bolus collection. But for me, the challenge is the documentation to actually show that it is all in place. Next slide, please. What happens in, say, a university where the collection is just a small part of what we do. And I think that that's the truth for anyone who has perhaps a museum in a municipality or somewhere else, is that we can't solve these challenges just in-house. Our campus safety, health and environment officers are responsible for the overall safety plans for our buildings and our campus, and they must be involved. And unfortunately, in our case, we've had some staff changes in recent years. So even though I suspect these plans did exist, I need to try and get them to find it and update it. And because I'm not the line manager for that staff, those staff members, it's not an easy thing to do. So we do what we can. Both myself and Ms. Mugwaza serve on a health and safety committee for our building, but we are going to have to actively facilitate and track progress for this particular aspect, the aspect of having the plans in place on paper as well. And for this, I'm actually quite grateful to the collections manual, because it gives us something to take to them and say, we are obliged to do this. Apart from the fact that, of course, legally, all buildings should have it anyway. This is just an added extra ammunition for us to say, you have to get your house in order to help us to get our house in order. So, yeah, and I think perhaps if other people have ideas on how to get other departments to do their job when it impacts on your compliance, that would be very nice to know, to have. But in general, I'd like to conclude the presentation for all three of us to say thank you very much to the NSCF for all the inputs you have done into our collections. It has made a huge difference already. And now putting some of the paperwork in place and starting to work on things that need tweaking through the manual, I think will assist us all. So yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for your time.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks everyone for lending us your ear. I think at this point, we'll open the floor for discussing anything that might have been raised during the presentation, as well as use this opportunity for other people to share the progress in their institutions.
Hi, hello everyone. One of the things that we have not been particularly good at the ESI is keeping hard copies of things. Electronic becomes very, very convenient. And we do have some rules written down that every 5 years, whatever databases are printed out and then bound. and all of these sort of museum standard things. But I have to admit, we have not done that. I just want to get some thoughts on exactly how important hard copies are and what should be hard copy. I can understand things like catalogs, but does one have to have every loan form and every other application in hard copy? Because as you know, paper becomes a real problem. Just if anyone has any thoughts on that, particularly in terms of the legal side of it.
So the importance of having the backups on paper is that it remains as a permanent record. Should anything happen to the electronic versions that we keep, we do have that as a backup. And in terms of entry records and it being on indelible ink and on an accession register and stuff, it is because it is a CITES regulation for any organization or institution, sorry, that keeps fauna and flora that is CITES regulated. Also, I think it is for the purpose of always making sure that such a specimen entered the institution at one point, and so should it disappear, there should be a record that it came. Because if I can make an example, if we only use the electronic databases, and if you can enter a record of 2 ivories entering your institution, and then I come in after you and I delete the record on the database, which will not always be traceable that this record has been deleted. And then I organize with USISIPO to take the ivories away, and therefore there might never be any record of those ivories ever existing in that institution. And so I will then not be the suspect, I'll always be in the clear, or whoever else that will have been involved. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, one of our rules is as well with the hard copy databases that if we make any changes on the electronic database, we're supposed to manually write in pen those changes in the hard copy as well. Because it doesn't help one has a hard copy and you're changing the things in the electronic version, and the hard copy does not reflect that. And it's one of those things that, you know, one has the rule, but it falls by the wayside quite quickly. I mean, Christina made a point of how busy everyone is with research and all the other things, that trying to do all these little things becomes quite difficult, but they're probably more important than what we think. Thank you.
So the hard copy records are not supposed to be altered, but we can change things like the name change of a genus or a species. But everything else, the idea is that they should not be altered because, yeah, they are there to serve as a permanent.
Well, actually, I think that came from the South African Museums Association's 32 or 36 points of requirements for museums. So that's where we got that idea from. And obviously one can very easily on paper see when an alteration's been made, whereas electronic, it's not always that easy to pick up when someone has changed something.
We had an unfortunate incident over the weekend where we had a break-in. We were lucky that there was no vandalism and no records torn up or no damage to the actual research material. But it could have happened very easily. And I think it's something that we should consider more, and that is to also have offsite records. And I think that is where electronic versions of things become a good choice. So, you know, it took a bad incident to wake us up to that point, but luckily most of our good records was kept electronically. It could have really went pear-shaped, but we were lucky. Just thought that's a comment.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Isabel. I am not sure if it's just my network, but I couldn't hear the last bit of your contribution.
I'm sorry, I don't think my audio is very good. It happens from time to time. I was just trying to say that I think Offsite Records is good. And if you have it electronically, it's easy enough to have it on a server or something like that.
Yes, of course. The hard copy and the electronic version should complement each other. It is not to say that we should have one type. It is very important to make that it should be the hard copy and the electronic version. And in some instances, the hard copy used to exist, and for whatever reason, people stopped using it. And so in that instance, in the working group, we agreed that the records in the electronic database could be printed and then be filed and be used in the place of the accession register. But then moving forward, the accession registers should be in place as they are a CITES requirement. And I think something that we already discussed and we agreed on.
Yes, thank you, Fulu. I was just wanted to comment on the basis of having to make changes on the hard copy. As Bernard said, that it's what the museum required. I think what's the best they can do is that have a column for the changes, but do not change anything on the original record. Just have an extra column and make those changes and the date of the and the dates when the changes were made, so that everyone or anyone who comes after can easily track what was the original record from that particular hard copy. I think that will work in that sense.
Thanks, Fiso. Yes, it is always important to make sure that whatever changes have been applied on the electronic version are also reflected in the hard copy. And yeah, I was wondering if people from other institutions, not necessarily from the ones that have already shared on their program, on their progress, sorry, will be willing to share what they have started to do in terms of implementing the manual. Even if they have not started, they can even share why they have not been able to start. But I know, because I have been communicating with you guys, that there are people who have started and there are people who have shared their issues. So I would like to open this as an opportunity to share with everyone, for instance, what the first thing you did was, and this is how far you've gone.
Audrey, I'm going to put someone on the spot for you. That's why I've had my hand up. I know that Dean Phillips from the Bolus Iberium in UCT is here, and he said that I could put him on the spot if I really had to. Dean, I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people are curious about your guys' experience of the fire on campus recently. And I'd like to ask you if there was anything in the manual that you guys either implemented, or if you hadn't implemented, that could have made it worse, or that you guys found useful. For example, I know I heard Cornelia, your curator, say last week that it was really useful to have your cupboards raised by 10 centimeters off the ground, because then when the water came in from the firefighting, it meant that there were centimeters spare before it would reach some of your cupboards, but at least you had the centimeters spare because you were following that regulation, which is something a lot of us have done by accident over time anyway, but is actually a recommendation. So is there anything else that you think from the manual requirements that was really useful to you guys and that would be good for other people to know, if I can put you on the spot?
Okay. So I don't know if this is strictly from the manual, but in terms of having cupboards that are fireproof, metal fireproof cupboards are also waterproof. And that was actually the main thing. The main damage was water damage to some of the lower specimen, the lower shelves of the cupboards. And even those ones are elevated. They have the same pedestal as the metal cupboards. The wood actually soaked up the water. So cupboards within the first, specimens within the first two shelves, there actually was a little bit of damage and those had to be evacuated. So I think moving over to or replacing all of our remaining wooden cupboards, ideally with metal cupboards, is probably one of the main things that we would do. Yeah, I think possibly also having a fireproof front door would have helped, because the fire in the RC Wild section, that front door is right next to our front door. So if it had come down those stairs, it would have burned right through our front door. So I think having some fireproofing, external fireproofing for the whole collection, maybe that would also be a help. Yeah, I can't quite think of anything specific other than that. Our basic fire protection, we have a working fire alarm and fire extinguishers. We don't have a fancy fire suppression system, so possibly that's also something to consider in the future. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, can I ask Dean what fire suppression system they do have there, and if it did work?
Well, so what I meant was we have just a basic an fire alarm system and fire extinguishers on site, but no really fancy fire extinguishing system. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure that a fire suppression system would have worked with a fire of this extent. I don't know how effective they are, but with a fire like this burning down half the mountain and coming off site, yeah, I have my doubts with a fire of that intensity, but yeah, I think that's something to consider in the future. I also actually wonder whether most of our cupboards, even the metal ones, really are fireproof. So, Christina, our cupboards are basically the same as the ones at Views. And I was wondering, would they actually even survive a fire? With the rubber seals on the inside.
I don't know. I suspect a really intense fire, probably not. I think in the case of a fire, it's more something where you're just trying to slow down potential damage until you can get it under control. And I think there the metal cupboards are useful because they're not going to spontaneously ignite like a wooden cupboard would. But,
Yeah.
Some kind of a disaster that can get you, unless you have a complete bomb shelter built underground or something. So I think it's all about, for me, it's about slowing down damage. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has ideas. You do get really very fancy things, and I'm sure the paleontological collections that have those really valuable skulls and things. I remember, when we went to Datsung, we went into some of those bomb-proof, fireproof rooms. That looked pretty impressive, but that's just not practical for a big collection, I don't think. So it would be curious to know what other people have. Maybe keep your types in those special ones, or your loans or something. But yeah, it would be interesting to know other people's ideas. Through you, Audrey, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Erich, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's an interesting point that's raised. I'm just concerned about suddenly our very fancy system, which is a kind of a pyro-shield system, which in principle is based on removing all the oxygen from within a room. And yes, given from what you said, once you lose your structural integrity of your collection room, So a fire blazing outside and the windows smashing, you lose the effectiveness of that totally, because it's not water-based. It removes the oxygen, and like I said, it relies on the room still being intact. So it would definitely not work in a situation where you've got a lot of structural damage to a building, being it a tree falling over as a result of a fire, or being adjacent and the window starting to kind of smash or kind of break down as a result of the heat. So it's a very interesting point that you raised there, Dean. Thank you.
I see that Sanelisiwe had a question in the chat box. She was asking, could anyone please help her with what kind of wash treatment does she need to use or to give plant specimens when removing them from formalin to ethanol, if anyone knows?
I don't know. If I think about it, Sane, in the past when we've had, are you talking about things that have been in FAA, which is formaldehyde, acetic acid, and alcohol? I think in our case, we've just moved them over to 70% ethanol in the past, and I'm not sure if we did the right thing. I think the museum people that deal with animal wet collections might have better ideas for this. We probably did the wrong thing, but I think it's one of those things that we must research and get back to you on. I'm going to put Nkosinati on the spot. You guys do a lot with your aquatics, your fishes. Have you had formalin ones that go across to alcohol or not?
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. So most of our fish, when they come here, they're in formalin. So we wash them in water, maybe for a couple of hours, and then 10% ethanol for a day, 50% ethanol for another day, and then they go in 70%. But we have never dealt with plants.
I'm sure it'll be similar. It might be worth looking into it and reporting back to everyone, and put it in the next manual version.
Yeah, you see, I was really enjoying switching off the video off, because I'm really embarrassed when I'm thinking about when I'm hearing other people having done so much progress, and yet we had one meeting. I think we had 2 meetings, and that was last year. We haven't had a meeting to really discuss the manual. I was chatting with Nonkoliso now, what Audrey was saying in terms of topping up ethanol, and because we don't check, and if it's half full, if we know that it's 70%, we just put 70% on top. So there are many things that when I'm hearing that, I think we need to really sit down and discuss and make sure that we don't really get excited about getting the manual and and we start implementing the manual. Yeah. So that's why I'm keeping quiet. I'm really embarrassed here. But yeah, so it's really refreshing to see and hear other people, doing something about, the manual that we were so excited to have.
Michelle, maybe you should just talk and not type.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I thought I'd tap it. Then you just see my big hands on the screen. So, but yeah, I think that's the value of these discussion forums, is to listen to what others are doing. And nobody's got everything 100% right at this stage. It's a process. But to share and to learn and to reflect, I think that's the value of this community and of these discussion forums. So it's, everybody's at different points of the implementation of the manual, and we'll have many more of these kinds of sessions. So I don't think that it's about trying to embarrass anybody.
Audrey, can I ask another question? Sorry.
Yes, you may, and you are a panelist. You can always just go ahead if it's safe to talk.
I'm curious to know if anyone's made headway with all the paperwork. I know sitting in the working group at the beginning, we were shown examples, and I know there are examples in the manual, and since it is a PDF, one could probably copy it. But personally, I would find it very useful if anyone had electronic copies of some of the paperwork that most of us are not using it yet, if they were happy to share it. So dare I say, so we could copy, paste and adjust instead of us all retyping everything from scratch. I know I'm being lazy, but I don't know, but is it a good idea? Or maybe it's available already through some of the international museum organizations. I should have a look, but I just thought I'd ask. I think it might benefit more than just me.
Yeah, so Christina, we should be able to separate out each of those templates that are in the manual. And so they just need to be saved as individual documents. And Audrey can do that. And then we can put them onto the NSCF website for download. And then if people modify them, you know, improve them, then perhaps they can do that and then upload their version as well, so other people can use that. But I agree. I mean, there's no point in everybody having to redo it from scratch. It's much easier to just share. And it might not everything in there is applicable to every type of collection. And so some parts can be removed. But yeah, I think we must do that, Audrey. We must just clip out each of the forms. So those are the forms for different things. But there is a lot of paperwork, and we will have a session on the documentation for the manual. I know that there's a lot of paperwork, and it might seem overwhelming and daunting. But it's like one step at a time. You do one document, you do the next one, you do the next one, and yeah, and file them somewhere and just work through it gradually. We'll through the webinars and discussion groups like this, we will help to go through each of the kind of documents that is required. But the forms, we can certainly take those out of the manual.
So for those institutions that are waiting for the leads, so we will be sending them next week. So by Friday next week, we'll have all shipped them to you guys. We are busy this week because we will be shooting a video for the Spinach conference in May and December. I mean in May and June. So by next week Friday, we would have sent all of them to you.
Thank you, Nati. Yeah, so you're not getting all the lids that you need at the moment. So we have some lids that were procured by SIAP that we can distribute, and we're giving you a portion of what you require, and then we are looking at putting in another order. So SIAP said they'd be able to do that again for us if we give them more funding. So we'll try and see how many lids we can get in the second order. So you'll be getting them in batches.
I'm not sure if there's still some questions to ask or anything to contribute. And I am feeling the silence is, whew, not sure if I'm the only one. Yeah, if there are no further questions, we can just wrap. So going once, to anyone that has not been able to speak today, anything to say, ask, share? Okay, I am going to assume there isn't anything more that we are able to contribute at this point in time. And I would like to take this opportunity and thank everyone for being able to join us today, and also thank the panelists for being able to share what they've shared on the progress of their institutions. And we hope to see you in the next upcoming webinar, then another discussion forum. Thank you and bye.
Thanks a lot.